I think we vamped for quite a bit. Uh, yes, I was gonna just go into like the whole topic of imposter syndrome. We'll start off with a bit of like uh talk about like what's involved. Uh, Little bits of information about like what imposter syndrome is about. Um, how what the features are, how we can spot it, why it happens, what we can do about it in that sense. And this is coming almost purely from an academic standpoint. Got my notepad ready, thank you, Jelly. So, when it comes to imposter syndrome, uh, we're gonna be talking about first off what it is, right? You guys can see the slides, right? Yeah, cool. So we'll talk about the definition of imposter syndrome, which is I think something that a lot of us feel, but and we sort of know intuitively, but we don't really have always like the best grip on like what it entails, right? So yeah. So imposter syndrome is this feeling that people get when they achieve success, but they feel like they don't deserve them for reasons that we will go on into later on. People with imposter syndrome believe that they're not intelligent. They are convinced that they have fooled everyone into um, believing that they can do the work, that they deserve to be here, right? Um, they uh, they feel like they've basically gotten to where they are in terms of their work or their studies, or their careers or their hobbies by some sort of someone's mistake, some clerical error, some they feel like they defrauded the universities. They feel like someone gave them a shot that they didn't deserve or they didn't really earn. So, common examples of people who might be facing imposter syndrome are people like uh uh researcher, like for example, if you're a budding researcher uh trying to do their PhD and not and feeling a bit out of place because you feel like your work is not as valuable as other people's work out there. So you don't know if what you're doing is worth putting out there, and you don't feel like you deserve to get a PhD. It can come in the form of um, a doctor who's just come out of medical school and now they're an intern and they feel like, oh, now they're officially a doctor, but they don't feel like a doctor. They still feel like a student that has to learn a lot. And they go into a world where everyone else is so much more competent than them, that they feel a bit out of place. It can look like a university student who uh, is looking around at everybody who has better grades than them, who can hold on multiple co-curricular activities, who can form relationships with people, and they wonder to themselves, why can't I do that? Um, uh, it, are they better than me in that sense? So might even be a university student who's in a very prestigious scholarship, uh, that feels and that has moments where they feel like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what to do with my life. They're wasting this money, this scholarship money on me because once I graduate, I have no idea what to do. Yeah. So, and it can take the form of other things, other people as well, which we will get into. Uh, and there's always this persistent fear of when people have imposter syndrome. There's a fear that um, they will one day be exposed as a fraud, and that's where a lot of the stress of imposter syndrome comes in. When you live in this constant fear, like, what someday someone's gonna be like, yeah, you really don't deserve to be here, and then they just kick you out, kind of thing, right? Uh, People also feel over evaluated by their peers, and because of this constant need to live up to an expectation that they feel that they can't meet. There's a general sense of anxiety, lack of self-confidence, depression might kick in as well. um and they get like frustrated because they have high standards for themselves and they don't seem to be able to meet those standards. um so if this sounds familiar to you, it might be because maybe because you have it, but we'll get into like the nitty gritty stuff, right? Um, Also, the more important thing is that these, like I said, if this sounds familiar to you, it's probably because we've all experienced something like this before. Everyone has had an experience where they go and they're about to do something that they've never done before, and they have like the, okay, I don't know if I can do this, right? That sense of self-doubt. That's not the same as imposter syndrome. Well, we can call that imposterism, which is like uh, a small level of imposter syndrome, right? Imposterism is like the symptom, right? Which happens once in a while. But if the feelings are persistent and continuous, where you always feel like this, then it builds up to the point where you have an imposter syndrome, which is where you get this not just, it's not just in a specific moment where you feel like you can't do the thing. You feel that in general, where you kind of like, ugh. You'll hear the phrase imposter phenomenon or maladaptive perfectionism, depending on where you look in the literature. Generally speaking, imposter phenomenon is the term that people use in research. So because we kind of started to call it imposter syndrome, because syndrome is what the term we use to refer to like a collection of symptoms that indicates the presence of a disease. And the jury's still out there. People are still in disagreement as to whether or not imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon is an actual disease or actual condition, because the ICD, which is like the International Code for Diseases, and the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychological and Psychiatric Conditions, don't list imposter syndrome as like a condition in the same way that they will talk about things like schizophrenia or generalized anxiety disorder or depression, that kind of stuff, right? There's no, yeah, they have, because the definitions and the ways to spot it still a bit iffy, right? And also other earlier research have looked at this as, have used the term maladaptive perfectionism. Yeah. So litmus test is that if you see the word imposter syndrome, it's likely this topic being discussed in a very non-academic sense, because there's been a lot of pop culture papers and editorials, articles that talk about imposter syndrome, because it's becoming a thing that's a lot more pervasive and recognizable now. But we have to keep in mind that these articles don't necessarily come from an academic point of view, because it's and in a sense this talk is also semi-academical, because people talk about their perspectives and give their opinions on how to fix the problem. That's why you get articles where people say like one thing to one way to combat imposter syndrome is to reframe your thoughts, and they just leave it at that, right? They don't tell you how, they don't tell you what thoughts, you know, they just kind of say, oh, just think different. Like, okay, thanks, I guess. So if you see the word imposter phenomenon in an article, then you know it's more like from an academic point of view. So I want to talk more about this, like the term maladaptive perfectionism, because it implies the presence of adaptive perfectionism. And perfectionism is a trait that we see in a lot of people, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. But like for example, adaptive perfectionism is what this paper that we are going to discuss, this paper defines as perfectionism that drives people, is more driven by a desire for success and achieving goals. It involves like a high level of personal standards of diligence and conscientiousness. It's very self-motivated and self-oriented. It's more about like I want to do this for myself. I want to reach the standard I set for myself. And then on the flip side, there's maladaptive perfectionism, which is not driven by a desire for success, but a desire to avoid failure, a fear of failure, and a need to hide your shortcomings and your imperfections from other people, right? So these are more driven by societal driven standards. It's not about what you want inside, but it's about what society and other people expect of you from you, or rather what you perceive society to expect from you. um, and people who have maladaptive perfectionism, they tend to fixate over their mistakes and have a lot more self-doubt, which is very close to what we talk about in imposter syndrome. So in this article, when you talk about um, when you talk about when this paper talks about the difference between adaptive and maladaptive perfectionism, the one of the key differences is that people who are adaptive perfectionists are flexible enough to allow for occasional mistakes, which is not something that maladaptive perfectionists do. Maladaptive perfectionists, they fixate a lot of their mistakes. Adaptive perfectionists, they don't like mistakes, but they kind of roll with it. They see it as part of the process, and they're like, okay, that sucks, but we go again, kind of thing, right? And this whole thing about fixating on mistakes is something we'll pick up more on later on. By the way, thank you for the log, Maisie. I appreciate it. Features of imposter syndrome, what we can see in people with imposter syndrome. One thing that people with imposter syndrome have is that they're very hardworking, and this already sounds like a great thing, right? But they are not just very hardworking; they are overtly hardworking, like overly hardworking, because these are people who don't believe that they have earned the right to be in this position. Therefore, they have to work extra hard in order to earn their spot, or in order to like cover up the fact that they're not capable. They're gonna do like extra work. So and so it becomes a bit of like a vicious cycle where you worry about looking intelligent, so you work extra hard to cover up for your so-called lack of intelligence, and that of course working hard eventually leads you to doing well, and people praise you for doing well and for being intelligent, and then you feel good about yourself for a second, and then after that you're like, oh shit, people think I'm good. Then you start worrying about being intelligent and people thinking that you're better than you actually are, and then you gotta in order to keep that up, you gotta work again. It keeps going on and on. So it creates a cycle where you are always working and you're always overworking, and yet you never feel like you're working enough, and you always gotta do a bit more. So that's where that toxic level of hardworkingness comes in, where it just keeps going, piling on without any like seeming end to it. There's this concept that's called professional inauthenticity, or rather, when the article talked about it, they called it academic inauthenticity. Because they talked about it in terms of people who are in academia, who are in research. Inauthenticity, being inauthentic doesn't mean being fake. It mainly refers to you not being your true self. Because specifically speaking, because you feel you are not capable, and you're stupid, you don't feel like you have the right to express what you truly think or feel, because you don't think your opinions have any weight. So you sort of censor yourself in that way, and then you don't speak up. You are more likely to listen to other people and take their word for what you want to do, for their word on their opinions, rather than listen to yourself. Because it's like you can give your opinion, you can sort of like, I think this way, but I don't know, I'm not very sure if anyone else thinks otherwise. I don't know. Then someone else says, well, I think that, and you're like, okay, let's go with them, right? Immediately, like discounting your own opinions and your own feelings because you don't feel like they're worth the thought, right? This especially goes into expressively listening to or adhering to the opinions of people that you seek to impress, because there are you do seek to like impress people, especially the people that you see as authority figures, people that you see like if they are cool with me being here, then it's fine, so you are more likely to listen to them. Yeah, and self-censorship is okay. This professional inauthenticity, not being your true self, like I said, leads into self-censorship, which is very bad in not just academia but a lot of instances, because You never know when someone has a good idea, and someone having a good idea is not necessarily dependent on like what status you are in your organization or whatnot. That's why like especially like for example in my in research, in my field, a lot of fields of research, the best environments are environments where the research intern who's there for like 2 weeks, who's learning stuff, can speak at the same table as an emeritus professor who has had thousands of papers, research papers under their name. Because when you have that open area for talking and discussing, new ideas can come up. Because sometimes just because they're newer people doesn't mean that they have bad ideas. They can have good ideas. They can have ideas that come from like other perspectives, or they can have like a fresh view on things that people who have been in the field for like decades would not be able to have because they're so fixated in their way of thinking. But if these newer people self-censor and they don't feel like they want to speak up because they don't feel like their thoughts and their opinions are worth anything, then we'll never get these potentially good ideas that people have. Right? Or and like I said before, overly seeking approval from authority and peers, because if you feel like you don't belong, you feel like you need to prove yourself and make yourself feel like a peer amongst the rest. So you seek to ingratiate yourself with other people, especially people in authority positions, using things like friendliness and human relatability. But it's not, there's no end to it, because even if you feel like you've won people over, you feel like you won them over not based on your performance but based on other factors. So you still feel like a fraud, right? So it's like a lot of behavior with imposter syndrome is very cyclical and not very it's hard to get out of that trap. And overall, all this leads to a low sense of self-worth, because people with imposter syndrome, even when they do something well, even when they have a success, when they pass an exam, where they have a good presentation, where they solve a problem, right, and people congratulate them, they don't feel like their success is because of their ability. They feel like their success is because of the fluke, because they got lucky, because they got a lot of help, because of whatever X reason other than the fact that they are capable, right? So even when they have a success, they're not able to enjoy the success. They can enjoy the feeling of the success for like a second, when they're like, oh, I did something cool, okay, and then after that it quickly fades, because like, yeah, but I didn't do it, it just happened, right? It just, yeah, I didn't cause it. So yeah, so you get that you get the reduced sense of agency, the reduced sense of like you're able to do stuff because of your power, and things that happen around you that are good don't happen because of you. So what good are you bringing to the table? So you have that low sense of self-worth. Other things include things like people who have imposter syndrome are very fixated on social standing, right? Because they don't want to display their imperfections to people. They want to keep up this in their mind, the facade that they are more capable than they actually are. So they're very aware of what people think of them, or what they think that other people think of them. It's a very like internal kind of process, right? But here's the thing to note about people with imposter syndrome: their actual ability is not actually different from those without imposter syndrome. People with and without imposter syndrome, if you look at their ability, their performance, their scores or whatnot, in academia, in their exams, in their work performance, blah blah blah, they perform the same as people without imposter syndrome. Sometimes even better because of the amount of work they put in. The thing is not that. What doesn't matter, what matters is not how much work they put in or what their ability is. What matters is that they still feel like they perform worse than everyone else. So it's a more of a perception thing that people aren't able to escape, right? And it's not our fault. Just because like it's something that we feel, it's like it seems like we're doing something that we're doing to ourselves, but it's not our fault in that sense. It's just people with imposter syndrome, we just have a bit of like a maladapted way in which we judge ourselves. and it's something that we can work past. And it's an interesting thing. In spite of people with imposter syndrome feeling like frauds, they actually don't engage in fraudulent activities. This is research back, by the way. Um, Fraudulent activities, like for example, cheating, plagiarism, actual things that frauds do, right? They don't do that, right? Because people with imposter syndrome want to distance themselves from fraudulent behaviors. They feel like a fraud, so they want to like get away from that feeling, so they will not engage in all these kinds of like false behaviors. And also because they feel like they're imposters and they always live in this fear of being found out, or discovered to be a fraud. People don't want to engage in suspicious behaviors that might arouse attention from other people. Um, is there anything else? And also, yeah, also, a very important thing. A lot of people with imposter syndrome have this feeling of isolation. Because they feel like everyone else is better than them, and they're not good enough. They feel like they're in this themselves, and they don't feel like anyone else understands what they're going through. Which is why one of the things that we can do to fight imposter syndrome, which we can talk about later on, is the feeling is the act of like reaching out to other people and social connectedness and social support. Then we discover that people are able to other people other than ourselves feel imposter syndrome as well. And also, like I said before, low tolerance for failure, right? Because you fixate on failure, you don't see failure as part of the process, but something that brings you closer to being found out. So you're afraid of that. So when we're talking about fraudulent behaviors, the paper talked about a thing, talked about how people with imposter syndrome don't engage in fraudulent behaviors, even though they still engage in what they call self-sabotaging behaviors. And so this is a very interesting thing that it's a bit, in my opinion, when I did the reading, it's a bit controversial as to like, because it's a bit blamey in that sense. But I think it's worth discussing a little bit because there is a little bit of a grain of truth. People with imposter syndrome, they are more likely, not will, but more likely to engage in what they describe as self-sabotaging behaviors. Things that we do that ironically and also sometimes somewhat purposefully hinder our success. A big example of this is procrastination. Procrastination is a very good example of a self-sabotaging behavior. If you think about it, it makes no sense to leave something to the last minute, right? Because you're just hurting yourself, and giving yourself less time to do the thing. And procrastination is a bit of a multifaceted thing as well because it's also a bit of anxiety driven. It's also a bit of an avoidant behavior. But things like procrastination, things like not really trying hard enough, just not giving your all into it, it's self-sabotaging. It's something that we do that is going to decrease our chance of success. But it's paradoxical because if we engage in these self-sabotaging behaviors to reduce our chances of success, because on some level we might feel like we deserve to have a lower chance of success because we don't actually deserve to be here. So self-sabotaging kind of gives us an out, a scapegoat in that sense when performance is not good enough. Like it's a bit self-defeating. Also like it helps. It's a bit of a coping mechanism, and it helps people to avoid the thought that I couldn't do this because I wasn't good enough, right? When you actually can't do something well because of the procrastination, you think to yourself, yeah, I didn't do as well because I didn't give myself a lot of time. That's the reason why. So you do that to avoid attributing the failure to yourself. You can attribute it to the sabotage, to the handicap that you're giving yourself. Where this concept becomes controversial is that one, not everyone does this, of course. Two, even if people do procrastinate, like I said, it's not necessarily because they want to self-hamper. It's also like an anxiety thing as well. And also three, it's people. It goes against the thought of if you remember what we were discussing before. It goes against the thought of people with imposter syndrome working harder than everyone else to prove their worth, and self-sabotaging behaviors goes against that. So there's also like the later research also talks about what the term is claimed self-sabotage, in which case in which people understand that they don't actually self-sabotage because they know that that doesn't make sense. And also, if people can see that you're self-sabotaging, if people can see you're not putting the effort, they are gonna like have a poor social perception of you, which people with imposter syndrome don't want. So they're not actually self-sabotaging, but they claim that they're self-sabotage. Right? And we can see this in research where you give people with imposter syndrome and without like a task to do. I forgot what task this paper talked about, like a some sort of memory task or a puzzle task or something like that. And when the people with imposter syndrome were asked what they felt about their performance, whether they could have done better or not, they talk about things like they claim all these things like, yeah, I wasn't trying very hard, I didn't practice hard enough. I guess that's why I didn't do as well. But when they look at the actual data, in the practice data, they perform the same as people without imposter syndrome. So it's not actual self-sabotage. They sort of just claim it, right? It's like they claim that they have a handicap, or they're more attributed to something that they perceive to be a handicap as opposed to something that they actually did to hurt themselves. So what we can take away from this is this: like, people with imposter syndrome do their best, but when their performance is not up to par, they're more likely to attribute it to external cause, like an external factor that happened, that instead of claiming an internal cause, that they were not good in the moment. So I see a lot of people sweating in chat because they feel like this applies to themselves. So this point, who can get imposter syndrome? Anyone. Yeah, that's it. All right, so this is a bit disingenuous. Yes, everyone can experience imposter syndrome. Sure. That being said, now that being said, I think it's still worth it to talk about who is more risk of getting imposter syndrome, right? If you don't fall into these categories, it doesn't mean that you can't get imposter syndrome. People who fall into these categories are more at risk of it, more likely to get it. So people that work at high performance and high stress environments, doctors especially, people who are I don't know, people who have the spotlight on them, right? Yeah, people who are always whose performance is always based on outcome and KPIs, key performance indicators, always feel scrutinized in that sense, and therefore they always feel like they have the eye on them and they have to constantly prove themselves, right? But this doesn't mean that if your field is not high performance or high stress, that is not that doesn't apply to you. Because one study did find that they compared perfectionism levels in med students with art students, and they found like art students have higher levels of maladaptive perfectionism, which is weird to think about, because you think about med students probably have more stress than art students, right? It might also be the case that med students might be a bit more aware of the imposter syndrome and aware of its effects, and there might be also better support systems in place to help them against it that art students don't have, because people don't think about art students in that way. A lot of studies have found that imposter syndrome is more common in women than in men. When they did literature reviews on this, they looked at all the literature. Half the papers found more imposter syndrome to be more common in women than in men, and the other half found no difference. The point is that no paper found. There's only one paper that found like um, it was higher in men than in women. By the way, a lot of papers look at men-women dichotomy. Um, there is very little research into people who fall into other gender categories. Um, only one paper that found more imposter syndrome to be greater in men than in women, and that was in a cohort of Malaysian medical students. And it's funny that it happens in Malaysia. This Malaysian paper found it, and not papers in a majority of research comes from the US, from Canada, from Europe, from India, from Iran. Because yeah, and they found that it's more common in minority groups, ethnic minorities as well. Because I think the reasons with women and with ethnic minority groups is kind of similar in that these are groups that traditionally feel like they're traditionally more scrutinized, and they're traditionally more feel like they have to prove more in order to like be there and this at the same place with like white men, you know. And it's also more common for people in lower societal positions, people who are just entering their jobs. And you can also see like how like this is similar to like depending on what industry and what culture you're talking about, women and people of ethnic minorities might also fall under the category of lower societal positions, as unfortunate as that might be. These are the kinds of people that don't fall under what society views as traditionally useful leadership skills, because leadership is very okay. Properties of leaderships of good leaders, they're very stereotypically masculine. Very people who are very assertive, very strong, very decisive, who are confident, and goes very it's very different from what society understands as more feminine traits. People who are more nurturing, more warm, more emotional, those aren't seen as very good leadership positions, right? Leadership traits. Therefore, when people with those traits attempt to go into leadership positions, they feel more scrutinized. They feel more left out. They feel like this is not what I'm cut out for, right? Culture, like funny about the Malaysian paper, because culture might be a mediating factor. There's not a lot of research into this. A lot of research into imposter syndrome really looks at people with people from a lot of Western countries. There's not a lot of research from Asia, especially East Asia and Southeast Asia. I've seen one paper from Korea and one paper from Malaysia. I haven't seen any from China or any other Southeast Asian country like Singapore or Philippines, Thailand. I haven't seen any from Japan. I haven't seen any from basically a lot of Asian countries, which is and these are all countries where you're more likely to get societal and also parental goals and aspirations for you for the person, as opposed to having your own goals, which is something that builds onto people with imposter syndrome, right? You get all these external standards you have to meet that you feel like you can't meet. Age might be a factor. The literature is a bit mixed on this, because with time might come a building of imposter feelings that will result in imposter syndrome, but also with time also comes experience and also more time to rise to the level, and you be getting comfortable with that level. So the literature isn't really in agreement as to whether or not age is a factor of imposter syndrome. And content creators, right? A lot of research, the research is very limited in the sense that most of it looks at students, especially medical students, medical professionals, healthcare, allied health nurses, dentistry students. One paper looked at managers. One paper looked at a lot of people look at psych students, because psychology students are a very good pool of place to get psychology research participants. You don't need to pay them, just give them extra credit, right? But I think this is something that is very relevant to us as gamers and people in social media and people in content creation, YouTubers, Twitch streamers, all that kind of stuff. And there's no research on that. But there is a bit of a unique environment for people like Twitch streamers, which we will get into in a bit. So, factors that might contribute to imposter syndrome happening in people. One thing, learn expectations. Like this is the big reason why I bring up culture, right? The first paper that talks about imposter syndrome, written in the 1970s by two women talking about imposter syndrome in professional women. They gave this scenario of like two siblings, one older, one younger. The older sibling is the sibling that was exalted by the parents as being the academic one, the smart one, the one more likely to be successful, the one that can do anything, the one that is naturally gifted. And then the other one, the other sibling, the younger sibling, was the one touted by the parents as not being as smart, but they're more street smart, the more nurturing, the more emotional, the more caring, the more sensitive in that sense. So this younger, more emotional sibling grows up their whole life being told that they're not good enough. So when you're told you're not good enough, you get told that enough times, you start to believe that you are not good enough. Therefore, when you do achieve something, you don't believe that you're good enough to achieve that. Therefore, you got that via other means, via illegitimate means, via means that were not in your control. You were lucky, you had help, blah blah blah. All those reasons that we talked about before. Imposter syndrome. And you think that this guy who was being told that they were good all their life escaped unscathed, but no, because being told that you're good your entire life is also not healthy, because you will eventually reach a point where you go into like higher education, go into the bigger world, where you discover that you're not actually like good at everything. You will eventually encounter something you can't do, and that's very shattering to your ego. And when you discover something that you can't do, you start to question everyone that has told you that you can do everything. Then you start to question that, and you think like, well, they lied to me. What else is true? What else did they lie to me about, right? So is my whole life a lie? Am I not actually as smart that people told me that I was? Imposter syndrome right there. So see, neither is good. See, this whole thing about like maintaining getting expectations from other people, getting too high expectations or not getting high enough expectations, has the potential to like do this to people. There's this thing about high end game goals with no roadmap. A lot of us aspire to be something better, which is a good thing to do. Good, it's always good to like be better than yourself, right? To improve. But what kind of mark are we giving ourselves? Are we aiming to be a bit better? Are we aiming to be like the best, right? What kind of gap are we giving ourselves? Like you can wake up right now and say like I want to be as big of a streamer as Miss.Kip, right? And that's the only goal that matters to me. And I will not rest until I'm as big as Miss.Kip. So there's no roadmap. It's just like Miss.Kip or nothing, Miss.Kip or bust, right? So you will always aspire to that, and as long as you don't reach Miss.Kip levels, you are never good enough. Even if you are improving, right? You're constantly improving, you are still not feeling like you're good enough until you reach the Miss.Kip level, right? So because there's no roadmap, because you're giving yourself a very high goal without any intermediate goals, every success that you have doesn't feel like a success. It feels like even more work. So a cultural institutional factors I was mentioning before, cultures where there's a lot more parental expectations on us, cultures where certain professions are seen as more desirable, doctors, engineers, that kind of stuff, than others. Institutional factors as well. When I say institution, I mean your organization, your workplace, your peer group, your university, that kind of stuff. What kind of culture is happening in there? Are people very competitive? Are people very communicative? Um, in middle management and proximal management, I'll use this term later on. Proximal management, your direct supervisor, your mentor, has a very big role in setting this up for us, setting up expectations and um, uh, potentially setting up too many expectations that people can't fit, or expectations without any praise or explanation that leads people to feel a bit fish out of water, right? Um, yes, and the need to maintain social standing, whether or not you're in social media, or because we live in a very social world. This need to maintain our standing and keep our appearances up with other people will lead us to like always strive to be something that we don't think we are. And having more to prove, right? There's a paper that looked at imposter syndrome and factors that lead to imposter syndrome specifically for minority students. They cited things like lack of financial aid, racial discrimination, having to work multiple jobs, um, being the first in their family to be in higher education. Therefore, there's a bigger expectation of them. So these higher expectations, these greater life difficulties, systemic obstacles that come in their way, are more barriers to like uh, achieving what they want to achieve, right? Or rather, they are made to feel like even though they're achieving, they have to overcome all these obstacles so they don't feel like achievements, so they cannot benefit from their achievements. There are personal factors that come into imposter syndrome, like being a perfectionist, like a maladaptive perfectionist, like we mentioned before. Pessimism comes into play as well if you're not able to, if people who are personality-wise not very inclined to see the good side of things and always like look for danger and whatnot. And people with low self-esteem as well. A lot of these personal factors, depression, anxiety, pessimism, low self-esteem, it's a very chicken egg thing. They help to lead into imposter syndrome, and as imposter syndrome gets worse, they echo all these symptoms and make them even worse. And it's also this concept of forming a personal identity. Sorry, not a professional identity. I mean, a lot of us, when we go into like a profession, there's a gap between starting and becoming that profession. Nobody comes into like nobody gets this thing where they want to be an Avenger and then suddenly Tony Stark comes to you and says, okay, you're an Avenger now. Boom, that's it, right? There's always a gap between learning how to be a professional and becoming a professional that you want to be. Like for a doctor, it's like going to med school, but even after med school, there's residency, there's internship. Throughout the whole process, there's a bit of a learning, there are learning steps here and there. And throughout this whole learning process, you are always emulating the person you want to be. You are emulating becoming a doctor. You're not a doctor yet, you're emulating becoming a doctor. And you'll do that up until a point where you invariably have done it so much that you reach doctor status. And doctor status might be official in that you graduate and boom, people put a doctor in front of your name. But you may not feel that way because you don't feel the same. You feel the same as you did yesterday before you were a doctor. Fake it till you make it is sort of like that. It sort of comes into play. The problem is, when do we make it, right? So there is a point that we can fake it / emulate / learn until we make it. But the more, if we do that and we have encountered a lot of obstacles in the way, inability to accept our successes and our growth, all those like systemic hardships that we encounter, if all these obstacles come in our way and the learning process doesn't feel like we're making any headway, then that builds into imposter syndrome, because we keep going towards it, the goal, but we never feel like we get there. So we always feel like we're playing catch up. We always feel like we're not good enough. We need to do a bit more. You know? Yeah. So this part here, the purpose of this slide, apart from the excuse of me putting my face besides all these people is here we go. Yep, this is the part that's relevant to a lot of us. Like I said before, um, there isn't a lot of research into imposter syndrome in social media and content creation. There's research in social media and how that affects our like self view and our self worth, but that's something separate. Um, but so this is something that we can kind of like discuss and speculate a little bit. But I mainly want to discuss things about being a content creator, being whether it's a Twitch streamer, a TikToker, a YouTuber, Instagram influencer, that makes this environment different from other environments where they traditionally study imposter syndrome, and yet we still have it. One thing is that social media has this big, it's very centered on this culture of self-promotion, self-comparison, and social standing. We've seen before that that this fixation on social standing and other people's perception of us is not good and leads into imposter syndrome, and it's something that has to be should be avoided or managed in people with imposter syndrome. It's not as easy for people who are content creators because our whole job, the whole thing is social standing and self-promotion, right? When you like retweet your when you like tweet yourself and ask for retweets, you shout yourself or you shout other people out. You're always looking at social standing. Even if I'm doing this right now, I'm talking this right now, I'm still looking at my view counter, right? I know it doesn't matter, but I'm still fucking looking at it, right? Because it's social standing and how people perceive you is a big part of the job, and it's not something that we can ignore, because if people don't see you, don't view you favorably, they don't view you, and then that's it, right? So avoiding the self comparison is not something that we can easily avoid. There's this, there's this thing I like to call the Instagram effect, where a lot of us will be Twitch highlights, right, and Instagram posts, Twitch clips are basically this. We show our best moments. We show the best thing that happened to us, and we hide all the boring stuff, right? We clip all like the squad wipes and the wins in Apex. We don't clip the times we die and drop unless it's funny, right? We clip all the best moments. Everyone clips all their best moments, and we all look at each other, and we look at everyone's best moments, and we get this like skewed perception in our head that this is their life and this is how they do and they're that good. And that kind of like messes with our perception of like, oh, they are much better than us, right? We see tweets about people who like, I have an amazing stream, I got rated for 1,000 people, blah, and then you don't hear about the other streams where they're like had 3 viewers or something, you know? Not that 3 viewers is bad, but relatively speaking, right? So that really skews our perception of how well other people are doing, which in turn skews our perception of how well we're not doing in that sense. And that's the other thing. We're comparing to other people. We're constantly comparing to other people, right? But these people are also our peers, our mentors, but they're also a competition. Like, wait, Jude, thank you so much for popping by. Have a good rest of your evening. Sleep well. Take care. Thank you for staying up. Alright. Our fellow Twitch mutuals, Instagram mutuals, you know, people that we stream with, stream beside, we rate, we get rated by, our peers, our mentors, their competition, they're all the same people. Even though Twitch mutuals are our friends, can be our friends, not all our friends, but can be our friends, they're also our competition. Especially in Twitch, because Ross has spoken about this before. Twitch is a very unique situation from things like Instagram and TikTok or YouTube, where you can have like people can consume multiple YouTubers, right? Or watch your video there, watch your video there, watch your video. But in Twitch, even if you are looking at a lot of chats, you are basically just watching one person. And if someone's watching someone else, they're not watching you. So even if they're watching, even if they're watching your friends, great, they're watching your friends, but they also mean they're not watching you. In that same time, I mean. So the people that we go to for support, in a very social support setting to help to combat our imposterism, are also the people that we compare ourselves against. and we think about like, why am I not getting as big of a viewership as that person, blah blah blah. So it's a bit of a tough situation that we are in. Um, Also, when we talk about inauthenticity, right? As performers, we are always putting on a show. I know there are a lot of people who are same on camera as they are off. Uh, but there are also a lot of people who put on a show, like people who are a bit more like ragey or who cosplay, even VTubers who have personas. They're always putting on a show, and even if you are the same as yourself, you may not always behave in the same way as you would off camera because you might do your best to censor your own not so desirable reactions. Someone's pissing you off in chat, it's not nice to go like, shut the fuck up, even though you want to say tell them that, right? It's always nice to be a bit more like, yeah, I guess you can say that, agree to disagree though, right? And it's not the reaction that you feel like you want to give, but it's the reaction you feel like you have to give in order to not alienate people in chat, for example, right? So the more you have to put on a show, the more you have to like do things that you don't come naturally to you, the more you might feel you are being inauthentic in that sense. Like, am I doing this because this is how I actually feel, or is it because I'm on camera? Am I gonna play Elden Ring because I love Souls-likes, or do I actually hate Souls-likes, but Elden Ring is the in-game right now, therefore I must play it, right? You know, and if I play a game that I don't like because I get views, am I being my true self? Am I being authentic? Are people gonna eventually find out that I actually hate Souls-likes and I'm only playing this for the views? Like, you know, like, well, these are the kinds of things that sometimes people think about, and leads us to feel very inauthentic. And we feel inauthentic, we feel like an imposter. And also this is the thing, when we talk about like organizations, right, and how your proximal manager, your supervisor, your mentor can help to foster an environment that is protective against imposter syndrome by being more diverse, being more communicative, being more supportive, being more understanding. We don't necessarily have that as content creators because a lot of us are, unless you work for an org or something, right? Even if you don't, a lot of us are, even if you do, a lot of us are essentially small business owners and free agents, in that there is no organizational support, right? Jeff Bezos has no idea who we are, right? I don't, as a Twitch streamer, I don't have a boss to answer to. Everyone as a Twitch streamer doesn't have a boss to answer to. So the culture that we surround ourselves in is basically Twitch. And it's this like nebulous, uncontrollable mass of whatever it will be in any given day in time. And it's not something that can be controlled, right? If the Twitch environment around you is not being conducive and is being it's helping you give you feelings of imposterism, it's not something that you can do anything about. In the same way that your supervisor, your boss can like sit down and have a proper chat with you in order to like hash things out, right? And then there's also this thing of gatekeeping and backseating, things that a lot of Twitch streamers don't like. As a quick recap, gatekeeping refers to when people tell you that when people like question your ability or your passion for a certain topic, like or you're a Star Wars fan, name every star kind of thing, right? Or like you're not a real Lord of the Rings fan because you haven't read the Silmarillion or however you pronounce it, kind of thing, right? Even though you like whatever you see, you people tell you like, no, you're not good enough because you haven't done this, you haven't done that, gatekeeping you from what you love. And backseating, it's like, I think a lot of us find annoying is when people this kind of like tell you how to play a game in chat, right? Advice here and there is nice, but when people tell you like, no, you're not supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that, heal now, heal now, heal now, drop all your heals, why are you carrying 12 backpacks, what the fuck, right? yeah, if people question people's play style and don't give deference to like how they want to play the game or how they're learning to play the game. You just tell them like, no, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, right? So gatekeeping and backseating altogether can start to add to a Twitch streamers or content creators feelings of people are questioning my passion for this. People are questioning my ability to play this game, my ability to stream. I guess I'm not as good as I thought I am. It kind of adds to those feelings of like I'm not good enough, right? This is why backseating and gatekeeping can be very toxic. This is why if you as Twitch streamers, we need to be careful of this. As moderators, we need to be sure that people don't get into your streamer's head when it comes to backseating, because it can really mess people up. It's not just about like annoying people in the zone. Backseating and gatekeeping, these kinds of things can pile up and lead to feelings of inadequacy. Because because like if people question your ability to be there, eventually you're gonna listen. Like if so many people think I'm not good, am I really not good? Yeah. And here's the thing, another thing, there is no end game, right? Like, what's the end point of being a Twitch streamer? There's an end point to being a doctor because there's a highest rank, a senior consultant or something like that, right? You can do like, I want to publish this paper or this journal, blah blah blah. As an academic, I say I want to work for this thing. What's the end game for being a Twitch streamer, right? There's always something higher to do. I gave the example right now. You want to reach Miss standard, right? You want to be as a big of a streamer as Miss. Let's say you work 20 years and you reach Miss standard. By the time you get here, Miss probably here already, right? If he's still in the game, right? And there's nothing that says that if you reach Miss standard, then what about like, okay, I could go beyond this. One more viewer, one more follower. There's no theoretical upper level. There's no end game. There's no point. Unless you are perfectly fine with like, I don't know, I'm fine with where I am right now. I like having a chat with 6 viewers where it's all like regulars. I can just talk about stuff. And it's always a good vibe. If you like that and that's your end game, then you by definition defined your end game that you want to have. That's good. If your end game is defined by what is out there, what is possible, then it's never going to end, because it's always going to be a next level, a next level, a next level. So there's never going to be a point where you feel like you've achieved something. This is the whole thing, right? Where you don't set, where you don't have like don't have a roadmap, don't have like midpoints. If you keep going, to reach as high as you can go, you're always reaching for a goal that never, that theoretically doesn't exist or can never be reached. It's always like moving, so you never feel like you achieve anything. And you feel like all of your efforts are not for anything. Hi Ali, good to see you. Welcome back to the stream. So here's a bit of a flip side. Can imposterism be good? And I say imposterism because I use the term imposterism to refer to feelings of being an imposter that don't amount to having full-blown imposter syndrome yet, right? So there's this thought process put up by 1 or 2 more recent papers. In fact, this paper is like in 2020. It talks about how imposter syndrome might be a double-edged sword, in that just based on the sign of how many successful people have some level of imposterism, maybe imposterism has a bit of a good thing to it. Maybe it increases our drive to succeed. Maybe there is a healthy level of imposterism that can help us maintain our drive, and if we go beyond that, then it starts to get toxic and it's bad for us, right? So, is there a way to strike a balance with how much imposterism we feel? So, perhaps a better way to think about this is this graphic that I've put up, right? So, this is the formula, the theoretical formula framework that I want us to think about. They're centered around this equation. Imposterism equals expectation minus ability. What is the difference between what we feel is expected of us and what we feel our ability is? How that leads to how we feel, right? So everybody wants to be in this, like this first one, this sweet spot, right? Anyway, you guys can see the highlights, right? Yeah, you can. Okay, good. Um, everybody wants to be in this sweet spot where your expectations and your ability are perfectly matched. You know what's expected of you, and you exactly have the exact skills to meet that, and that's it. Boom, sweet spot. You've achieved nirvana, right? If, for example, if your ability goes a bit higher than expectations, you get this point where you feel overqualified. You might feel that you are you can still feel accomplished, but you feel like you might be bored because like you feel like you can knock anything out of the park, but there's not really that much of a challenge because you're a bit overqualified for the job. This is like you know the hero. Okay, the hero in every movie, they go through their journey in the first movie, right? And they become like who they want to be. And the second movie, the beginning of the second movie, it always starts with a fight where you can see them kicking ass, right? Because they become a thing. Neo, that's it. Neo in the Matrix Reloaded, right? You see Neo go through his whole journey in the first Matrix movie, and he becomes like the one at the end. Spoiler alert. And the second movie, you can see him very easily beating agents at the beginning. Later he has challenges, but in the beginning he's like there. He's overqualified, right? So it feels good. We can still feel accomplished, but we become bored because there's no challenge to us. And then we get this point where our ability becomes much higher than our expectations, what's expected of us. We feel superior. Then we start to feel dissatisfied because we feel underutilized, we feel bored, we feel like this job is beneath us. We don't. Why am I here? I'm way beyond this. This is beneath me, kind of thing. That's not good. The unbalance the other way is also not good because when your expectations are above your ability, you get imposterism, right? You feel like something's expected of you and you can't really meet it, so you're gonna have to work a bit more to hit that mark. But if your expectations greatly exceed your ability, that's where imposter syndrome comes in, possibly, right? Perhaps that's what the framework is, where the expectations met of you are so high that you don't feel like you can meet them. Therefore, why am I here? This must be a mistake that I'm here. Imposter syndrome, right there, right? So, but the key point, right? The key point is the word feel. I said, right? The feelings of imposterism are the difference between what we feel is expected of us and what we feel our ability is. So again, this is how we interpret it. It can be a bit subjective. It's not necessarily what like our job tells us to do XYZ and we cannot do XYZ because we're not qualified. It's all about like we feel overwhelmed by the situation. We feel like we can't respond to it. This thought process of like, is there a good level of imposterism? Maybe. Maybe we need a bit of like feeling that we're not there yet gives us a drive to keep carrying on. If we feel like we're there already, or we'll feel like we're overqualified, there's no drive to improve. But we can't feel so out of our depth that we're like, I shouldn't be here at all. Because that's where imposter syndrome kicks in. Quick roll off of things that imposter syndrome can lead to, like we said before: depression, anxiety, feelings of like poor self-esteem and self-evaluation, like we mentioned before. Like I said before, a lot of this is very chicken and egg. These things can lead to imposter syndrome, and imposter syndrome can lead to these things becoming even worse. This poor self-evaluation is especially important because, like we mentioned before, people with imposter syndrome are not responsive to success. If we get success, we feel like we didn't earn it and it was because of some other external factor. Therefore, we cannot take it to reinforce the idea that we did good, right? It also lead to burnout and poor job and life satisfaction and poor work-life balance because um, we feel like we are constantly having to work more and more and more. The more you work, the less time you give yourself, the more likely you are to burn out. The more you work for less perceived payout, um, the less satisfied you are with your job. And the more you work, the more less time you have for yourself. The work-life balance is all over the place because you're just not giving time for yourself, right? You're not giving time to recharge. It's all about work. It's nothing else. And then imposter syndrome can also lead us to keeping a low professional profile. This is like I said, like if you feel like a fraud and you don't want to be found out, you just want to avoid being seen like a failure. So you just kind of fly under the radar and you don't put yourself out there for fear of that someone might discover that you are a fraud. And because you don't put yourself out there, you never allow yourself to excel, to lead, to do things that you've never done before, to improve. And the organization that you're working within will never benefit from your greatest potential for excellence because you never put yourself out there. And also stress, right? It's constant stress of like being in a position where you might always be found out, right? You're always living in fear, right? To keep up with like the facade, the image they're giving people, obsessing over keeping one's position and how to advance. In fact, we're talking about like self-sabotaging behaviors. There's an idea that when people with imposter syndrome engage in self-sabotaging behavior, part of it is trying to sabotage their chances of their position of being there, so that people will eventually find out that they are imposters and they don't deserve to be there, and they get kicked out. Because once you get kicked out, there's ironically a sense of relief in that, okay, I've been found out. It sucks that I found out, but I no longer need to keep the facade, and that's it. You know, it sucks that you lost the position, but on some level, you're relieved that you don't have to keep up the lie anymore, which is paradoxical and also a very illogical and unhealthy way to think about things. So yeah, problems. Yeah, like I said before, not motivated to excel or lead because you don't want to put yourself out there and like draw attention to yourself. So how do we manage imposter syndrome? I'm going to tell you right now that there is very little, almost no documented or research methods for dealing with imposter syndrome, except for the blanket solution of cognitive behavioral therapy, because CBT in a professional setting with a licensed psychiatrist or psychologist can help to fix a lot of things. CBT in itself is very flexible, so yeah. But other than that, there's not a lot of research into like what can fix our imposter syndrome. And if you see a popular science article that talks about, oh, this is how you fix imposter syndrome, a lot of it is very much conjecture. But what we can sort of like glean from all these sources is that the first thing, right, as this is the case with any mental concern, the first solution is to recognize it within ourselves. This is the very duh thing to say, but I think it bears repeating. Given what we know about imposter syndrome right now, the first step is to recognize it in ourselves, to recognize that we do face these concerns, and then we can start to do something about it. There's a lot more talk about organizational support, especially from proximal organizational sources like your managers and your mentors, to help to cultivate a healthier work environment that is not as toxic, or is not as like kind of squeeze people dry like that. Because a lot of research in the past and a lot of like thought process in the past have really framed imposter syndrome to be a very personal issue, a matter of self-perception within the mind that the person has to fix. In other words, the person is broken, right? And then we're starting to shift away from that and towards thinking about like, yeah, but what about the organizations and the environment surrounding us? How are the expectations put onto us That's your one joke. That's your one Among Us joke, by the way, Ross. Oh, fuck, I can't time him out. Okay, anyways. Um, what what is our environment, our organization doing to contribute to the imposter syndrome, putting unreasonable expectations, pitting people against other people. This goes into like the peer network as well, which is where social support comes in, right? Talking about each other's about feelings of imposterism. Even if you don't have feelings of imposterism or imposter syndrome, you only have a bit of imposterism, not amounting to full-blown imposterism. And it's worth talking about. It's worth sharing with other people because maybe you do have imposterism, but you just don't feel like you have it full. But after talking about it, you might realize that you do. Or even if you don't have imposter syndrome, but you do have the symptoms of imposterism, talking to other people about it will help us realize that these thoughts are more common than we feel, than we initially thought. That and other people have these thoughts as well, and it's possible to have these thoughts without being full-blown uncontrolled imposter syndrome, right? In talking to each other about this, we validate each other's doubts and fears, which is a very important thing, not just in imposter syndrome, but in talking to anybody concerning their concerns, their insecurities and stuff like that, right? When people say stuff like, I'm not good enough to play this game, I'm not a good streamer, I'm not entertaining, I'm not funny, blah 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 kind of thing, there's always this almost gainsay, like automatic reaction to be like, no, you're fine, you're amazing, you're beautiful, you're perfect, you're cracked, you're hilarious, blah 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 kind of thing. And it's a nice thing to say. At the same time, it's not really addressing what the person is saying, right? If a person plays Apex and they keep dying on drop and they say like, damn, I'm not having a good day today, and then people may chat like, no, you're cracked, right? I'm like, the person will be like, do you not see what I'm seeing? Are you not listening to what I'm saying? I am not winning any fights. How are you saying I'm cracked? It kind of gives off the feeling that people are not being sincere with their words, even though they mean the best when they give us these good words, right? So it is possible to reassure a person that they are better than they think they are. They're worth more than they think they are. They are better at the game than they think they are. They just might be having a bad day. They're a better streamer than they are. It's just like algorithm reasons. They are more hilarious than they are. It's just not the right crowd. All these kinds of things. The first step always has to be validate their doubts and their fears by recognizing that I hear what you say, I can see what you're saying, that and I hear you. Let the person feel heard so that the concerns are, heard and validated by someone, so they don't feel like they're going nuts in their own head thinking about this and then no one else agrees, right? Because if they're thinking one thing and everyone else tells them differently without any explanation, they're like, it's almost like they're gaslighting themselves into thinking, wait, why is everyone saying this and I'm not thinking it? What's wrong with me, kind of thing, right? Yeah, validate what they feel and where it comes from. So they feel seen, but they see like, oh, people recognize me, they see me and they see my concerns. Then we can go there from then on to help out like what they're going through and try to help to do the reframing of the thought process, as it were. So that's a very important part of social support, and this is something that bears repeating whenever we talk about stuff like this. Always validate people's concerns and hear them out first, and then from there see where we can go, instead of just saying, no, you're fine, right? What's next? Okay, there is a paper that did talk about this paper over here that did have an online module to help first year dental students cope with the imposter phenomenon, and they came up with like 6 tips. 2 tips were pretty, and then they asked, overall the program was pretty good in helping people manage imposter syndrome. Reports of imposterism went from like 40% in the cohort to like less than 10%, so it's a pretty significant drop. And after that, they asked people to rate how likely they were to, how often they do each of these 6 tips. The two tips that were done the most are these two tips: scheduling activities to prevent procrastination and reduce time spent on over prepping for non-essential tasks. Okay, procrastination is, like I said before, one of those avoidant behaviors, one of those like self-sabotaging behaviors that people with imposter syndrome engage in order to like avoid the confronting fact that they're not good enough to do something. And not just procrastination, but there's also a nice subset of procrastination that a lot of us like to affectionately refer to as productive procrastination, right? Like the kind of thing where like you're about to study, but it's always when you're about to study when you suddenly feel the urge to do your laundry, to hoover your apartment, to meal prep, to like write a diary, or start journaling, or doing all sorts of stuff that is technically procrastination, because it's preventing you're doing something else to prevent you from doing your work. At the same time, you kind of justify in your head, you're like, yeah, but I had to do the laundry sometime anyway, so at least I did something. Which, true, fair enough, but it doesn't get away from the fact that you're still escaping from the things that you have to do. So scheduling activities to prevent that is very useful, and it may seem, to people who have never done this before, it may seem very stupid, in that you have like a Google Calendar with like 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. lunch, 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. study, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. rest, kind of thing. It seems very stupid to kind of like schedule your whole life that way. And maybe you don't have to do that whole, like, all the way like that, or maybe start like that, and then after that you kind of get the feel of what you want to do, and then schedule your work timings in which you kind of work within this time, and make sure within this time all you're doing is work. If you need to do laundry, don't do laundry as a way to escape your work. Schedule laundry time after work, or in place of work, kind of thing. But as long as you keep a schedule and stick to it, you'll prevent like these kinds of procrastinating thoughts, and actually power through the work that you were too anxious to do. Scheduling also helps in scheduling, in a micro sense of scheduling work and breaks. Like if you've been to any of my co-working streams, or Waffles co-working streams, or anybody in the co-working community, we do a thing called the Pomodoro technique, where you do for example 45 minutes or 50 minutes of work, where you just buckle down and work and don't do anything, and just mute the stream and just work, and then 10 minutes of rest where you can catch up with chat. That kind of like micro scheduling helps to keep your productivity up, helps to prevent procrastination, because you are going to give yourself a break, and it's going to be a good break. It's going to be a good for you to unwind. But when you're focused, you're really focused. And it helps you really tackle the thing that you were too anxious to do. Reduce time spent on over prepping for non-essential tasks is sort of related to procrastination, but it's kind of like keeping yourself busy with like small things that don't really mean anything. Like everyone's favorite thing to do when they start, like I'm gonna make when you want to be productive and do all these things, everyone's favorite first thing to do is make a to-do list. You make the to-do list very nice, and you have like stencil, and you got the nice checkbox to tick like that, and that kind of thing. You kind of doodle around to make it nice. Yeah, over prepping, it's just another form of procrastination in that sense. And it kind of like gives you the sense of because it gives like a nice flair on things. It's making yourself seem more professional by doing things other than tackling the thing, which is overall not very healthy in keeping imposterism at bay. Because like we said, we can do all these things to seem like a professional, but you will also kind of look at this and say like, yeah, I only look like a professional. I'm not actually a professional. Therefore, all of this is gonna pointless. So, yeah. Reduce time spent on this kind of thing, keep to your schedule, and then you can keep on your track. The other two things that people sort of did here and there: have conversations with your peers about imposterism thoughts. Thank you for the raid, please, and thank you. Welcome in, everyone. Have conversation with your peers about imposterism thoughts. like we said before, social support is very important. Um, what am I saying? Yeah, social support is very important in helping people recognize that imposterism thoughts are not just in them, but in other people as well. Helping people say like, oh, you have those thoughts, I have those thoughts too. I'm not going crazy. It's all around. We don't feel so isolated. We feel like, and then you feel like the people that you looked up to, that you thought had their shit together, that you are jealous of and you're trying to work to emulate, are also having the same concerns as you are, and then you don't feel so alone. We also talk about focusing on other community or volunteer work, which they don't really go into detail why that helps, but I'm guessing it's because you're getting in touch with other people. I don't know. Two more things that they suggested that most people in the survey reported not doing: keep a notebook/diary for your imposter thoughts, which can help, but I think can be very confronting in that, you know, it kind of makes you look at all the bad shit stuff that goes through your head and you'll be like, what the fuck? It makes you very uncomfortable. And also, if you're the kind of person that keeps a diary, you have done it already, and it's very hard to get people who don't diary to start diarying. Like a lot of us, I think a lot of us who don't diary have started a diary before and written 3 entries and just kind of left it to the wayside because I don't feel like it. It's not really my thing, right? So, and then there's a thing of seeking help from professional mental health services, which is always an important thing. Also, if you ever feel like you need professional help, you should seek it. Most people didn't reported not doing this. At the same time, they looked into the data and they found that the people that did do this are the people that rated the highest on the imposter syndrome scale that they were given. So, which reassured the authors in that, yeah, not a lot of people were seeking help from like mental health services, from psychiatrists, from psychologists, from therapists. But the people that were are the people that really needed it. So people will tend to do all these other strategies first to help keep the imposterism at bay. But if it gets really too bad and overwhelming, they know how to seek help. And people, yeah, so that's at least reassuring in that sense. Okay, last kind of thoughts for us to consider based on like, because we all talk about reframing our thoughts in order to combat imposterism, right? But what kind of thoughts can we reframe? So here's one thing to consider. There's nothing wrong with receiving help or being lucky. Just because we achieve something with the help of others, it doesn't diminish our personal contributions to our own success. This is a way of helping us to get around the imposter thoughts of, I'm only successful because I was lucky, I was only successful because I got here by a fluke, I was only successful because other people helped me, I didn't do anything. It is very possible for you to receive help, for you to be lucky, for someone to receive help and support and all the opportunities in the world, just for them to squander those opportunities and in the end, nothing comes out of it. The very fact that you were given help and you were lucky and you were given a shot doesn't discount the fact that through your own efforts, you were able to capitalize on this help, on this luck, and achieve what you have achieved today. And you are here, at least in part, at least in a great part, because of what you have done with the opportunity that you've been given. So, I mean, even if you think about like, I was thinking about John Wick when I was thinking about this point, right? John Wick is a character of determination and sheer fucking will, but also a character that we kind of think that a lot of guys think about, like, yeah, he's a lone guy that can do everything, right? He doesn't need help. He goes around. He exacts his own revenge by himself. He does everything by himself. If you watch John Wick closely, there are times where he's gotten help. Yeah, You can see the whole montage of him getting intel in the hotel, him buying guns, him getting a bulletproof suit from the tailor. That's help. You can see times where he got lucky in that he almost, there's a couple of times in the first movie where he almost dies. Like for example, when he almost got killed by that Perkins, the assassin in the hotel. The time he almost got when he got captured by the Russian gang leader and almost got killed, but someone else with a sniper rifle helped save him. He got lucky, he had help. But that doesn't discount the fact that after he got that help, he still managed to come out on top based on his skills and his doing. So just because you are lucky, just because you can see like, oh, you got here because you got lucky because you had help, doesn't mean that you didn't do anything to help yourself as well. So you still have agency in this. Another point we need to think about is that when we compare, it's healthy to it's useful to compare ourselves to see where we are standing, right? But it's probably better to compare ourselves to the average. We need to be healthy when we're comparing ourselves with others. We compare ourselves to the average person, to the whole group of people, and not just to a specific person. Because there's no rule that says that mischief is the standard that we need to reach. If we don't reach it, that's not good. When we compare ourselves, we need to compare ourselves to the average, like the average streamer. How are they performing? Are they doing this? Are they not doing this? What can we use? How can we use that to inform our style, our practices, what we're doing, right? But looking at one person arbitrarily, because this person might be a fringe or a exceptional case, right? Setting ourselves that too high of a standard might just be harmful to us. That's the other thing. Setting too high of a standard, right? We can manage our goals, but where is the what is the goal? And is the goal too high? If the goal is too high, what are our steps in between that can help us to that goal? Right? We've mentioned before that setting ourselves too high of a goal will cause us to always feel like we're not reaching that goal, which will cause us to feel that we're not good enough to reach that goal. Where it might be the case where the goal is just too high out of our reach, and we can get there eventually, but we need to set like tiers for ourselves with like intermediate goals. Like we'll hit this point, and we'll hit this point, and then we'll hit this point, you know, so that whenever we hit a point, we feel like we achieved something, and we know that we achieved something because of what we did, and that will help to combat the imposter feelings of never being able to achieve anything. And also, we have to manage our goals and remind ourselves who are these goals for? Are they for us? Are they for our parents? For society? Why are we doing these things? Getting comfortable with failure, like we said before, people with imposter syndrome and maladaptive perfectionism are not comfortable with failure. People with adaptive perfectionism are. They're flexible with failure. They kind of see failure as a little bump in the road, but they just kind of continue with it. So there's this is a bit of a okay. This is me being very optimistic, and I don't have a concrete way of how to do this, but this is something that I think we should work towards, and if we can help each other work towards it, we should. In getting comfortable with the fact that we're not gonna be good all the time, we're gonna have failures, and success and good performance doesn't mean that we are correct or successful 100% of the time. We are going to have moments where we fall off the wagon a bit. We're gonna have moments where we don't do our best, and when we have those moments, it's not because we're not good enough. It just happens. It may be because we weren't good enough in the moment. It doesn't necessarily mean we're not good enough in general. And even if we're not good enough in general, it doesn't mean that we're not good enough. We can't become better in the future. And it might also just be actual external factors, like it was a hot drop, that's why I lost the fight, kind of thing, right? So getting a bit more used to failures, moments that we fail, or people like to talk about celebrating failures, which is a very non-specific thing to do. Like how do you celebrate a failure? Right? There are ways. Like for example, like if you died in Apex in a funny way, clip it and show it. You know, laugh about it. And we get more confidence in experiencing failures and knowing that the failures don't define you. You can sort of roll with it, and then each failure that you encounter won't automatically cause you to feel like this is evidence, this is irrefutable evidence that you don't belong here. You just don't feel like, you start to feel less like that. Self-worth is not tied to performance, right? It's always okay to want to be better, to want to be better versions of ourselves. It's not the only thing that our self-worth is tied to. Just because we're not better, just because we want to be better, it doesn't mean that we are not good as we are right now. That makes sense, right? Yeah, wanting to be better is not the same as we are not good enough now. There are a lot more things that inform our self-worth, our ability to love and care for each other, our friends and family, and all that. It's not just about our metrics, right? And so I like to, and not being the best is not the same as not being good enough, right? Which I like to think about this analogy, right? This is the last slide, by the way. There's a series of BuzzFeed called Worth It, which is, in my opinion, the only good thing on BuzzFeed right now, where they kind of take like 3 different foods at 3 different prices and they try it out to test how good they are. I like the episode on steak, where they had a cheap steak, medium price steak, and a very expensive steak. And apologies to any vegans out there or vegetarians, they got meals like this. So they compared this $11 steak and eggs meal with a $72 dry aged ribeye and this $306 Japanese Wagyu steak. And they talk about it, and they're like, okay, this steak is the best. Obviously, the steak is the best. It's got the most care. It's the most delicious, the most flavorful. Like, they really take care of how they cultivate the meat. I mean, the cow even has a name. I don't know if you can see it. The cow has a name, right? So this steak is objectively the best. Does that mean that the other steaks aren't good? No. The other steaks can be good. If you went out and you wanted a steak and you wanted to get the best steak that you could get, and let's say you had only had enough money to afford the $72 steak, are you gonna have that steak, or are you gonna say, no, that steak is not worth it? I'm going for the $306 steak. I will not eat any other steak until I work hard enough to earn myself enough money to afford the $306 steak. Or is it even possible to go for the $72 steak and say, I enjoy this right now? Eventually, I hope to make enough money to buy the $306 steak, but for now, $72 steak, not bad. I like it. It's good. Even if you can't afford the $72 steak, the $11 steak is probably pretty good as well for its price. I mean, context, right? Context, right? This $11 steak and eggs with fried rice and toast. This is in downtown LA, where the prices are like, this is a freaking good deal, right? There's nothing wrong with eating an $11 steak, one day saying that, one day I'll get myself a $72 steak, or eating a $72 steak and one day saying, one day I'll get a $306 steak. It doesn't mean that the $11 steak is not worth eating. It doesn't mean that you are a loser for eating the $11 steak. It's, for what we have right now, it is good enough. If you want to stay eating $11 steaks for the rest of your life, that works as well, if you're entirely happy with that. And if you aspire to eat a $72 steak, yeah, eat the $11 steak right now and then work towards making enough money to eat a $72 steak. But until you reach that, $11 steak's still probably pretty good. So just because you are not able to achieve the best doesn't mean that what you have right now is not good enough as it is for the moment. It is still worth something. It is still valuable. That's the analogy. And yeah, that's the slides.